Hey there, it's the Submissive Next Door with your host, Dr. Tiffany K, board-certified sexologist and certified holistic sex educator. I'm here to bring you a down-to-earth approach to the world of kink, BDSM, and alternative lifestyles. So grab that drink, kick back, and let's get kinky. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Submissive Next Door podcast. I am your host, Dr. K. And today we have a very special guest and another writer, someone that I very much admire. I have been diving into his work on Patreon. So we're going to talk about some of those things. And he is the sexy, smart Christian Pan, a bisexual author of erotica fiction based in New York City. And since just 2021 alone, he has published 5 novels, 90 short stories, and numerous reviews of erotic fiction and nonfiction. Since 2022, he has been the captain of the Queer Erotic Content Creators Club, which is also a permanent A club on Patreon. Thank you so much. Did I miss anything?
No, that's plenty. Thank you so much. When you were saying that, I thought, wow, I have done all that it's April 2021. Because sometimes I think it's hard to look where we've been because we're so focused on whatever's right in front of us or the goals we have ahead. So yeah, I don't know how I did all that, but I did.
I think it's fantastic. As a writer myself, a lot of my people know I have ADHD. So sitting down and focusing for long periods of time. So I see numbers like that. I'm like, you're my hero. And how did you do that? Because that's incredible.
Yeah. Well, it's not something that I always did or did well. I think I tell people half jokingly that it took a global pandemic for me to become a writer, because before the COVID-19 and the lockdowns here in New York City, I was a good starter of writing, but I never could finish anything. I didn't know how to rewrite or shape anything with words in a way that I felt made sense or wanted to share with anyone. But I'm so grateful that I learned some tools and I got some workshops with some people. And then I just felt like I got this breakthrough. And now I feel so much more confident about, oh, I know how to do this. Like I learned something and now I can keep developing and keep nurturing it. And now I just feel like I can't stop.
That's awesome. And I know, especially when it comes to writing, whether you're writing nonfiction or erotica or anything else, it takes a bit of time to develop that confidence in yourself that, hey, I'm a writer. Like just saying I'm an author or I'm a writer, sometimes it's that imposter syndrome, I think, that really sets in, that hits you hard. And especially being in a realm where there's you do a lot of amazing queer writing. And it is like, I'm so in love with your newest story. Every Time We Fuck, We Win. Just, there is such a level of like, I can relate to that. I understand that. That's something I went through and those feelings. And it's really incredible. So, I mean, being a bisexual author, like how has your sexuality sort of helped to shape your writing over the years?
Oh, I mean, I haven't found a lot of stories that reflect me. And I think for many years I was frustrated by that. I would enjoy, I guess, different kinds of fiction that was about same sex or opposite sex encounters, but I didn't feel like I could find any stories that were really reflecting my own experience. And I guess over time, that's like a little poke into my shoulder saying, well, maybe you have to write this. Like maybe you need to take that leap and share some of yourself. And so when I was starting out, especially, I was told that I needed to pick a lane and really stay within a specific lane. And not to be contrarian, but I thought, why? I mean, I have lots of things that I like to do, a lot of subjects I like to write about. And I'm always wondering when I'm told you can't do this in writing, it reminds me of my own experience off the page and in life about, no, you can't do this. And I'm always asking, well, why? Why can't we? And the story that you mentioned, I mean, it's set in the early 1990s. I moved to New York in 1990 and pretty soon started joining and volunteering groups like ACT UP and the Pink Panther Patrol. And that was a really important part of my own, I guess, coming out and my own formation of my identity, both in terms of my sexuality, but also politically, socially, more broadly. And when I started looking at what to write about, I didn't want to just write porn. I wanted, and not just even sexual acts, but really people who have sex. And I thought, well, what people? What are they doing? What are they talking about? And what are they feeling? And I was surprised how many people don't even know what the Pink Panthers were. And I thought, wow, that's not that long ago. I mean, it's
You mean
30
it's not
plus years
that
ago.
that pink thing, that pink animal that they show on, back in the
Well,
cartoons in the old days? That's not the
well,
pink
it's well, I mean, but that, I mean, funny you mentioned that because that trademark image was what created such controversy at first, just to raise attention on this anti-violence community group, and also I think caused it to fragment because you can't call it the Pink Panthers. There was also criticism about it even using Panthers at all because of its association with the Black Panther movement from the 60s. So I feel like all that, in my opinion, from volunteering there for about a year was just unfortunate because it's trying to just keep people safe when they're out at night during a time of gay bashing. And I think especially now when there's a lot of violence, both overt and legislative, against people who are queer, I just feel like, well, I have to write about this. And since I'm writing erotica, I want to put the two together and see maybe I can get some of that queer history into the public awareness because they're reading my smut.
I love it. And a lot of people don't necessarily think, when they hear the term like pleasure activism or
Mm,
activism in general, they don't often
yeah,
think about erotica being part of that. And it
yeah.
absolutely is, especially when you are choosing to read things that have these much more sort of, I don't necessarily want to use the word moral, but much more ethical undertones that are helping to shed
Mm,
light. And I noticed in a lot of your writing, you do this, and I think it's brilliantly done, where there's a lot of consent, but not just verbal consent. You talk a lot about the emotional, the physical consent and the differences. For example, when Liz and Sam were like, I'm telling you, like, you don't know your own story, but I noticed with Liz and Sam, like Sam was getting, like, she was saying yes to something, but her body was wincing to like a touch or to a kiss. And so Liz had pulled back and was like, okay, I can, like, let's take this slow. That I think needs to be in my opinion, but hearing and seeing that and reading about that, it's like, wow, we don't think about those two being completely separate. So, I mean, that to me is a form of pleasure activism in
mm.
teaching true consent, not just verbal consent, but also emotional and physical consent. So I applaud you for that. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think sex and intimacy and expressing our desires is a very nuanced thing. And I think sometimes I read erotic literature and there's a um, almost like a set of rules about um, we have to have, I feel like sometimes it's almost ripped from a Wikipedia page, like explicit, enthusiastic consent before anything happens. And I remember reading one story where there was a couple driving and they could see a hitchhiker. And they were going to, the driver, the husband asked his wife, should we pick him up? Should we maybe enjoy and explore some polyamorous fun and play? And they went through this literally 5-page discussion about it. And I'm like, how far away is this hitchhiker? I mean, this is really not real. And I feel like that is a kind of utopian vision of like, let's really have a blueprint in the writing of how we want our interactions to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. And just like I don't think there's anything wrong with the trope of it's always billionaires with their private jets flying beautiful, always younger women to some mansion in Long Island or upstate New York, where there's this dungeon and they have nothing but time, nothing but toys to just play. And I'm like, okay, so for the other 99% of us, what can we do? What are they doing? And is that the only expression for sexual freedom or sexual progress? And I feel like the people that I know, they're not billionaires. They're not, they don't have private planes. They rent, they're divorced. They have complicated pasts. They have history of trauma. They've got mental illness. They're furious about a lot of things in current events and politics. And I'm constantly told, you shouldn't write about that because it's going to destroy the fantasy. And I'm like, maybe for you, but for me, I feel like knowing about these things and having that be part of the fabric of the story makes the story more interesting, but also makes, I think, the characters more believable. And that's what I'm interested in. I want to find a way to bring in more of that reality and see what we can do. And also, why not? I mean, I think erotica is like it's a subgenre. It's underground. It's like pulp fiction 80 years ago, where it's like, oh, you can't, it's just garbage. And I feel like that's also an opportunity to talk about things that are important. And I think in our world today, we've got so many topics related to the body and gender and sex and intimacy that I don't think are as fully realized in a lot of the writing that I read. So I feel like I want to do my part if I can to try and put more of that in there.
Exactly. I love that you do that. It's I talk about this, or I've talked about this on a different podcast a while ago, but I think it's an important topic to bring up, that when you see erotica that is in Amazon, on Amazon Kindle and all of that, oftentimes you don't realize that those are being published by a publishing house. The publishing house has one goal: to make money. So they are going to pander to the mass. They are going to put out erotica that is heterosexual for the most part. It's going to be 50 Shades of Grey. It's going to be things that people are more familiar with, and it's not going to deviate from that very much. So in order to find the more, the taboo erotica, or erotica that is a little bit more realistic, or things that the mainstream mass may necessarily not want to read, or just haven't been exposed to, for that matter. They may not even realize it exists. You have to go other places. You go to Patreon, you go to Smashwords, you go to all of these different other options that are available out there. And before you know it, you're kind of opened up to this entire world of a different way of reading erotica. That's one of the biggest reasons why I joined your Patreon, because that's what I'm looking for. So thank you for continuing to do that.
No, my pleasure. I mean, I think, yeah, it's a challenge. I think, like any artist, I mean, my background is in performing arts, as you perhaps could tell, or maybe some others can tell too, but it reminds me of Broadway has its own kind of content that they put into their houses. They have their own marketing campaign, which works because it's a commercial enterprise. It's exclusively for profit. And that's not the same strategy or same thinking for a 99-seat experimental theater in Brooklyn. It's not the same as a regional theater in Cincinnati or Austin or Seattle. So it's trying to understand, when I'm writing something, where to locate myself. Like, not every play should be on Broadway, and not everything that starts in a 99-seat theater should move to Broadway. And some things on Broadway can't exist in a 99-seat theater. So it's just trying to understand, like, well, where are we? Because I think there's this idea, unfortunately, that if I don't want to be 50 Shades of Grey in terms of reach and popularity, stay home. I got nothing to add, forget it. And I'm like, wow, what a horrible vision. If only, the most popular book is the goal, and everything else has no voice, no place, no appreciation. I mean, some of the worst shows I've seen in my life are on Broadway, and we're overpriced, and we're just a waste of time and money. And some of the best thing I've seen were like these tiny, junky, trashy, small, intimate theaters, which didn't have a huge focus, but literally changed theater. Like, they change how I think about the form, which is 4,000 years old. So it's like there's so much room, I think, that we can contribute, and it's not just driven by money. I think if we want to make money, if I wanted to make money, there's so many better ways than self-publishing queer erotica. I mean, come on. There's so many other ways I could do it.
But would you be as happy? That's the goal, right? Like being able to bring light to something, being able to say, I'm literally living my passion. That's why I do what I do. I think most
Yeah,
Patreon creators, I think we can all agree, like
yeah,
we are definitely driven by passion more than we are by the dollar sign.
for sure. And I think that's an age-old tension about, I mean, it's not as though I've been in some spaces where saying that I want to have a story that's important to me, share with the world, I'm labeled an artist in a disdainful manner by my peers, which is really, it's not like, I mean, it stings initially, but then I just think, here we go again. Like when I was an actor starting out, I was told I have to do cruise ships, I have to do commercials. It's all about the money, like get a soap, get a recurring role. And it's like by that metric, selling toothpaste on a commercial is a better acting gig than working with Andre Gregory or doing a tour of an original piece that I helped to create. I mean, which is to me just ridiculous. It doesn't mean I don't care about money. Like this kind of either or thinking is also not true. It's just, is there any kind of room for, yes, I want to make money. Of course, we live in a world where things cost, but I want to also write something that doesn't challenge my integrity, that is part of me, because I want to share. That's why I write. I want to share parts of myself with people I don't know yet, and have that intimate conversation through the story.
I love that so much. It's so true. Like finding that balance, right? It's all about the balance. And I think you're doing an absolutely incredible job with finding that balance. And you certainly added to my day yesterday just by being able to sit there and read that and go, wow, yes, I love this. Like this just hits home so much for me. And you brought up kind of the idea of there kind of being categories, right? So what about, how would you define erotica versus smut versus like written porn? Like what, or even going further into the taboo, like what would be the difference between taboo and kink erotica? How do you define that?
Well, that's such a great question. Well, I think, I mean, at the outset, I think there's debate on what each of those different terms mean. I know writers who I would think write fantastic erotica who call their work smut or call their work porn. And I know pornographers, which are categorized as porn in the public, that I think are very erotic and are very artistic. And I guess part of it of maybe is the kind of attention to detail. I think there's one thing that people say is like, oh, you're doing erotica because I do spend more time on the buildup. I try to get into the interior lives of these people. I don't just have by the middle of the first page someone fucking or masturbating or putting a new plug up their ass. Like it seems like that's almost like, oh yeah, you have to do that. Again, this like,
it's about the slow burn. The slow burn is good.
Yeah, and also I think, like I really think outer course is a really important thing. Like we get so much focus on genitals and nipples that I feel like we lose the rest of our bodies, and also we lose the rest of ourselves. And I think why are we, especially if one reads a lot of other erotic literature, you start to notice a kind of pattern, like everything begins here and then it's this giant buildup. And I feel like, are there other ways to tell a story beyond that? And I think the second thing is I think some writers feel like too many details gets in the way of the reader getting aroused, that it should be as blank as possible, almost like the characters are Jack and Jill, so that you can put yourself into the story and just get right to the description of sexual acts. And I feel like, yeah, but I want to know, like, are they tall? Are they short? Do they have red hair? Do they have blonde hair? they wear glasses? How old are they? What's on their mind? What's their mood? Do they say stop? Do they laugh? I mean, all these things I think are really they they enrich my imagination, and that gives me a real sense of pleasure. Um, but I think these distinctions are also like kind of within erotic creators. I think the larger world, anything that deals with sex is just like criminal activity, grooming kids, threatening America.
Yep.
Like not climate change. That's not threatening America, not gun violence, but some independent writer self-publishing a story of people that don't exist having consensual sex. That's the problem. Um, and I think the dark, like the taboo erotic, I think is interesting because it's not just not having a happily ever after, but it's also trying to get into these more complicated zones of, can you depict scenes where there isn't consent, or the consent is ambiguous? Can you have other kinds of topics which are complicated, harmful, painful, controversial? Some of those I think I am interested in, others I'm not. But I think it brings up a lot of interesting questions about creativity, and I'm always curious when I encounter other creators who have like, I don't write about this, because I think it's not so much it's not so much about convincing them or myself to change, but more I'm just curious why you have this boundary, because I think there's an opportunity for self-awareness and understanding about, and to honor that, to say, yeah, I'm just not interested in that, or I am interested in this, I just don't know how to do it.
I like that. And it's interesting. I've come across, especially lately, it seems like in the mainstream erotica, because I mean, I'm very much probably like you, I'm an erotica connoisseur. I enjoy many different genres, and always looking for something kind of new to whet the appetite. And there was one that is out there right now. It's a fairy tale, because fairy tale erotica is my personal favorite. And it's about the Captain Hook. I think it's called Hooked. There's Hooked, and then there's Scarred, and there's like a whole series of them. And it's a big one out there right now. And I was like, I wonder what this is. And I was really shocked, because there was a lot of non-consent. There was a lot of choking. There was a lot of edge play and very deep daddy issues throughout the entire story. And I was like, wow, this is like a mass selling book right now. Like, we went from 50 Shades, and now we're kind of going into almost a different, darker genre. And to me, like, that would be taboo erotica. And it's something that's out there in kind of the public eye. And it makes me wonder, like, as we're moving through this, what else we're going to see. Again, though, it's het, which still is like, we have such a discrepancy between looking at the general population and the different demographics, and a very small amount of actual writing that is really speaking to them. And then we see stuff like this with the edge play and all of that. And it's just a really interesting time to see how erotica is changing. And it makes me wonder what the next generation is going to be reading. Like, oh my goodness, this is interesting now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I haven't read that series that you're mentioning, but I think like a number of writers and books that I still find just extremely well written and fascinating and powerful. I wonder if they would be even published today, because they're so they get very sticky with these kinds of things. They're not it's I mean, the thing that I find important, one example, last year I was rereading Anais Nin. I hadn't read her for some time, and all the criticism and all the descriptions of her work is often erotica from the female gaze, feminism, dismantling patriarchy. And I'm like, yes, but the actual work itself is just so absolutely filthy with taboo. I mean, so much incest, so much violence, so much non-consent throughout her work. It's not like, oh, there's that one, and then there's this. I mean, it's everywhere. And so I'm like, how many of these people are actually reading Anais Nin? I think the idea of her or versus her work. And I think it reminds me of Lolita
Oh
by
yes.
Nabokov.
It's been a couple of years since I've read that, but oh my God. Like
Yeah,
that
so
was
it's
wow,
so
it was a little much.
it's so intense. It's so intense, and and I believe it's meant to be intense. It's not advocating pedophilia.
Yeah.
It's not. It's the book really is saying this is horrible, this is terrible, and at the same time challenging the reader to not be seduced by this slippery-tongued, unreliable narrator of Humbert Humbert. So it's so complex. But so when I read that, I go, it's really gutsy and challenging. And I don't know if that would fly today, because I think we're not real. I think we don't have as much nuance. So a number of years ago, I was in a book club and we read this one series of BDSM erotica, which is excellent. But at one point, I was like, this is really hard to read now because, there's these protests outside for the murder of George Floyd. It's like it's hard for me to like get into an arousal or a fetish of white rich people saying slavery is so awesome. Like it's just hard for me to read that right now. And I was just shut down by the other people in this book club being like, oh, come on, it's just a story. And I'm like, well, Lolita's just a story. So how come that is being taken as like some kind of real document? But in this case, this is just fiction. And I feel like that inconsistency, I think, is where we live. I mean, I think some people when they read erotica, there's a real expectation about what it's supposed to do, what it's supposed to depict, and how, and what you're just not allowed to do. But I don't think we apply that to every part within erotica or just in reading or art in general. I mean, it's like that, not to against anyone who does like alien sex erotica, but like, it's not my jam. But if you are on a UFO with like a octopus alien thing, I don't know how much consent you can have. I mean,
That's fair.
I mean, to say like, hey, no, beam me down. I mean, you can say that, I suppose, but it's like there is no consent. I mean, you are on a spacecraft. You're not on planet Earth with something that is so much more complicated and powerful than you, and yet that's fine. But like, if you have a centaur with a human, that's like, whoa, bestiality. And I'm like, there are no centaurs. There are no people. This is made up. Like, this is completely fictional. So it's really, I don't know. It just leads to more questions.
That's
I don't know. I don't know the answers.
You're talking about the aliens. Like there's one story it was an edit I was working on, and the edit was it was a sex scene between this woman and Godzilla, and it was just like this. It beautifully written. Like, don't get me wrong, her writing was fabulous. I had very little editing I needed to do with it. But it was just like, wow, this is a story and a half. Like for no other reason, it was just entertaining, not so much the, turn me on erotica, but just like, holy shit, someone came up with this and put this on paper.
Yeah.
Wow, this is interesting. And I think maybe people can look at erotica that way too. Like it doesn't always have to be about turning you on. It's really a space. Yeah. It's almost like kink, right? Kink is the ability to give yourself permission to play as an adult in a sexual way. Yeah. And erotica is very much that same sort of space. You're giving yourself permission to explore ideas, to just play and let it kind of go where it wants to, but then also stopping to think about all of those other nuances, all of the pieces that go into it between consent, where is this coming from, what does this mean, do I need a disclaimer? I think those things are really important too, as just a writer in general. But maybe that's just me.
No, I agree. And I think it's I think it's I find a lot of it. I think it's really vital for me and other humans to linger in a space of metaphor and imagination, and that sometimes images and stories are not comfortable. They're powerful, they're unsettling, and I think it has the potential for change. And I think that's good. But I think yeah, I think it, there's so much possibility within writing and self-expression that I don't necessarily have to read everything and like it. Just like as a sexual person, I don't have to be into everything. I think I can make up my own boundaries, and I feel like why can't we have that same acceptance for things that are imaginary? I mean, there's no like all the people that I write about, none of them are real. They're just so. I mean, I guess if people are so shocked by some of them, sometimes I'm like, I guess that was a successful story because they think these people are real, but they're not, and that's part of the magic of storytelling and art is that they're not though, and that's okay.
And since you're talking about imagination and coming up with these ideas, just for other aspiring erotica writers or maybe just hobbyists out there that really enjoy writing something kind of dirty, how do you go about, like, what's your research process look like when you're trying to come up with an idea? Are you the type that you have sort of like a outline in your head before you put it on paper and then you do your research? Or are you just generally researching and you kind of wait for that light bulb moment of, oh, this is a killer scene, I want to write this?
Mm. It's a mixture. I don't have like a consistent method, but I do read all the time. I think that's any writer who's aspiring, I would say read as part of your craft. Just I think if there can be if you write 2 hours a day, read 2 hours a day. Like just try to, it's sort of like the Stephen King suggestion. Like Stephen King I think he says it in his book
Oh,
on
the
writing, but
on writing is the
yeah,
memoir. Oh God, that was like I
it's
still reread that. It is
it's
amazing.
it's one of my favorite books about just writing. And I think, but in interviews, he's also emphasized it as well that, don't go to grad school. You don't need to. What you need to do is read nonstop and write nonstop. And not just read within the genre you want to do, but read anything you can get your hands on. So I often have a number of books in rotation, erotica, but also fiction. I like history. I like memoir. I'm just curious. And I feel like it shows me what are the possibilities in this form because I get to see other people doing it. It's like I learn about acting by seeing films, by seeing plays. I get to study like, oh, that's an interesting choice, or oh, that's not clear. I don't get that. So I feel like that's one thing I would offer. The other thing is, I mean, I live in New York City, so I love people watching. I love being a kind of anonymous fly in the wall at a cafe or a park, and I find just the random conversations that I'll hear around me, I'll go, oh, that's great. Like, it's like I get a scrap of a conversation. I think, okay, I'm going to do the rest, and then just write something that's inspired by some fragment of a piece of dialogue. Sometimes it comes from a conversation I'm having with my partner or with friends, and I go, oh, that's really, and then it gets us talking about certain things about consent or crushes or an experience we actually had or an experience that we thought could have happened but didn't, like something like all that. And I go, huh, and then I just start jotting down notes. I mean, I have my little, you know, of course, it's from Paris because I'm a francophone, but it's just like, just write stuff down. And sometimes I'll see a movie and go, oh, that's not sexy, like an erotic thriller, but that's not sexy. That's just stupid. And I'll be going on and on about it. And I think, okay, I need to like write my response. So I just start writing an outline, kind of flipping how I think the film should have gone, or I think the play should have gone. Sometimes it's looking at a trope and thinking, how can I flip it? Like, if we have all these billionaires, can we have something that's like just lower class, like just people who are poor? If we have this, there's a conversation about AI and robotics and what does it mean to be human? I think like, oh, that's a really interesting topic. How could that work in an erotic frame? I mean, I'm always just trying to think like how to use this this frame of erotica to just put in everything that I'm interested in. And I think it could be writing about sex we've had. I mean, why not? I think that's a great starting point for any writer, is like, write what you know. But I think it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be autobiographical. It can be as fantastical and as imaginary or as realistic as you want.
I like that. And especially I think people watching, like the voyeurism, it's very much like, I do the exact same thing. That's one of my favorite things to do, especially around LA.
Oh, yeah.
Overhearing some of the conversations, especially like down in the Venice Beach area, where it's just a lot of young people being very free with themselves and free with life in general. Very colorful population. And you just overhear some of the damnedest conversations. Like it's really kind of fun at the same time. And definitely keeping a notebook. I think in my house, I have a notebook, like in my bathroom. I have one by my bed. I have a big one, tons of them here by the computer. And you just keep on putting it down. Like every little idea I call it my idea bank. It's just, you keep on adding to it all the time. And sometimes when you just have that urge to write and create, you can pick something from there, like, oh, I remember I think I'm going to go with that one today.
Absolutely. And there's so many, and I think when one keeps reading erotic literature, there's also, one may notice patterns of how the story progresses, how the episodes of sexuality expand, develop, deepen. And that could be, it's like you're learning, or I learned like a kind of music, like this is the orchestration, this is how it goes. But once that becomes familiar, you can then say, well, I don't want to do it. What if I were to do it this way? What if I have the orgasm first and then have everything else follow? What if I don't have orgasm at all? What if I mix the sequence of things? What would that? I mean, it's a language, and storytelling is a playground. You can do whatever you want, and I think if it's of interest to you as a writer, I think, and especially if you're self-publishing, go for it, because you're not bound by anybody. It's not like there's 5 million readers out there clamoring for me to do the next bestseller the same way. And it's the advantage of being relatively small is that there's a lot of freedom to explore and experiment. And so I think, especially for someone who's new, like, really go far out with what interests you and what seems vulnerable, and try to get closer to that, like stay close to that and see what you can write about it.
I like that a lot. And is there a certain author or a certain book that, like, when you think of erotica, like something that you personally enjoy, what would be like that one book that pops up into your head?
Oh, there's a few, but one that I really liked was actually by Walter Mosley, called Killing Johnny Fry. I don't know if you know this book, but
I've heard of it, but I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet. And I've had you're the second person in like the last 2 months that have told me I need to read this book. So I may have to get this book now.
I think it's relentless. And I think, because when I was starting to write, I didn't really know where to go, or like what's a model. But I read that book and I thought, wow, that's really pretty intense. And in a good way, in an arousing way, in a kind of engaging way. And also Guy New York definitely was an influence on me, especially his book, The Yes Rule. I think because it's a novella, but I think because I knew a lot of the places he was referencing in that novella, I was like, I can see it, I can kind of put myself into it, but it's just it's so filthy, it's so taboo. And I thought, oh man, and it's also very bisexual, because I think there's a lot of bisexual women depictions
Oh yeah.
in a lot of stuff that I read, but I don't see as many bisexual men. And if I do, it's often like very tragic, very oh, you're just closeted, you're not you're really gay, you got to come out. And so I feel like how to show a different side to that, based on my own experience and my own, I guess, experiences of other people I know who identify as male and bi. So those two books, The Yes Rule by Guy New York and Killing Johnny Fry by Walter Mosley.
Well, I know what I'm reading this weekend, so I
Yes,
appreciate that very much. Thank you.
for sure.
When it comes to writing, because I noticed that you do, you write from both perspectives, from male, from female, and you do it very, very well. And I personally, I struggle a lot when I'm trying to write from a male perspective, just being I'm a pansexual female, but I have a lot of trouble getting into the mind of a guy. And I know it's one of my struggles. So I try to do it a lot because it is a challenge for myself. Do you find that writing from the female perspective, or like either perspective, regardless of what you're writing, that one is more challenging for you than the other?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the stories I write are from a woman's perspective. I'm not sure how that unfolded. I mean, most of my life, most of my dearest friends are women. So that perhaps could be it. I try to examine when I'm writing, like how much of this is gendered, like how much of this is exclusive to men or to women, or to is this person straight? How do I know? Are they gay? How do I know? Like, I feel like those are interesting questions for me to try and explore. I don't know if I do it perfectly, but I think a lot of especially when I'm writing women, I definitely have someone in mind that I know as a kind of starting point, that I try to ground it in some kind of reality. And I also have readers who will tell me, like, that really is so accurate, or I don't understand this, and I take that kind of criticism and praise to heart, of trying to find out what is it, and can I get closer to it? I mean, I think I'll probably spend the rest of my life trying to get closer to it, but I'm trying to just really show that there's a range of expressions and thoughts and feelings amongst all of us. I don't think I just try to make it as true and as show people in all their complications as they can. Yeah.
I really like that. And people, I think readers out there who don't do writing, it's hard for them sometimes to understand, like when it takes a while to write a book, or sometimes you really have to like dig deep and think about it. And it can be like almost a soul searching mission of trying to figure out, okay, what is this person like? I need to put myself in their shoes. Or especially if you're writing a really lengthy novel and you have to kill a character off, and it's like, it's gut wrenching for you as a writer to have to see him go, or sometimes it just feels really good just to, cut him out. But it's, going that deep with writing for people that are really in tuned to the craft. It's there's a lot that goes into it. There's just this entire world of self-searching and researching and talking and figuring those things out. So I definitely get that perception when I read your writing, just based on the inner dialogue. That inner dialogue, I think, is where a lot of that comes from, of like, oh, I can tell that this person is feeling this because you just do a really brilliant job with it. So this is going to turn into just a fangirl session at this point.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think I guess it's also from my acting background about listening and observation. Like, just listen to people. There's so many interesting people everywhere around us if I just listen. And I really enjoy just having a number of spaces every week that I attend or that I moderate or that I just show up at, where I could just listen and observe. Because I feel like I get so much about when I listen to other people be honest about who they are, what they think, what they feel, including when they're upset or despairing. That gives me permission to also share how I feel and think, including when I'm upset and despairing. And so then I feel like we can make some connections together as a people. But then when I leave those spaces, I feel a greater sense of understanding of who I am. And then I feel like that feeds into the writing, or at least I try to, like, can I bring some of those feelings into these people so that they're not all just going to a space and taking off their clothes and just jumping into bed. It's like trying to find, like, yeah, but who are these people? Like, what do they want?
I think erotica also gives you an opportunity, especially if you look back at historical erotica. I've recently bought some books that were about Victorian erotica, and like going way, way back. I mean, you and I have talked a little bit about Shakespeare, and he's a dirty fucker, but it's like there is some really good stuff out there, and based on these sexual desires and fantasies and feelings that you can literally feel in these works, you can even look back and you get a good sense of the shifts in humanity, and it actually brings a lot of people together too. Like, we all have these thoughts, we all have these fantasies in one form or another, and maybe there's a group of people out there that don't, which is okay too. But for a lot of us, looking back and going, wow, we have been so concerned with hiding nipples from the media or having to cover up a body because it's so sexually arousing. Like, the society as a whole is more intimidated by two people making love, or by a topless woman, for that matter, being, walking around. And yet we see video games and TV shows where people are literally getting their heads blown off, and that's okay. But yet you look back in history and you see these eroticas and you see these private writings, the underground stuff that had to be snuck around. And you realize, like, wow, this is something that we have literally been doing and trying to find an outlet for since the inception of writing itself. It's really incredible looking at the history. I don't know if you dove into any of that in your studies, but it's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought back the, like, kind of zooming out the camera to the history, because I recall in the ruins of Pompeii, I believe, they had discovered these images of sexuality in every room.
Everywhere. They even had coins. They had coins that have the act on it that they would give to people. Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah. And when I've gone to museums like the Louvre that have, like, these really ancient statues of these gorgeous nude figures, there's been this, and you look at these paintings from Renaissance, and there's a constant awareness of the body as not just a transport for the mind, but like the kind of carnality or the animal of ourselves, and how that is. It seems like there's this constant attempt to regulate it. I mean, whether we go back to, like, the Bacchae and Euripides to now, where it's like what you're criminalizing drag shows. So it just seems like there's this whole continuity of this kind of fear for the unpredictability of humans, especially women or people identifying or presenting as women, having agency on their bodies. And if there's any deviation from this norm, this kind of hierarchical capitalist reproductive, contribute to the economy model, if you're just having sex for pleasure and not procreation, if you're having sex with more than one person, if you're not married, if you all this stuff just disrupts. And instead of investigating a disruption or a new thought, it's like put it down in a basement or in a closet or some other dark place. And I think that what's also interesting is with every shift of technology, whether it's painting, photography, the video camera, the internet, porn and sexuality and erotic art is always immediately there. It's always looking for some expression. This is something that I think we all are interested in on some way. And I think figures like Shakespeare, part of their brilliance is that they're able to throw that in this public setting before you almost realize it. Go, oh my God, that was such a bawdy joke that just landed right there within this, tragedy or this historical drama. It's like, no, it's really complicated. It's really queer. It's really sassy, and I think I love it. I mean, I think sometimes a lot of the discussions around sex today, especially in sex education, it misses that sense of play and pleasure and fun. I mean, I think unfortunately, like when we have sex education, it's either all about biology, like don't get pregnant, don't have these sexually transmitted diseases, or it's just people going to Pornhub and trying to figure it out at age 11. Like, is this sex? I guess so. I don't know. So by the time they have maybe a more mature conversation about it, it's a lot of unlearning, but also trying to say, okay, we know you've been grooved for years to think it's just biological or just some kind of violent theatrics, but there's actually a lot of fun. You can have communication. You can have a sense of adventure and play. But I think that's where erotic writing can play an important role, is like just to depict and show these other kinds of possibilities for people that maybe they don't think about, because it might be intimidating to go to a play party on Friday night. So I can read something. I don't really know if I'm into that. I don't even know where to ask. I'm embarrassed to ask, or I don't. All this kind of stuff I think is very real. But if they're reading something in the safety of their home and their imagination, that might give more permission to say, wow, that sounds pretty fun. I like to be with, a man and a woman at the same time. That sounds great, or whatever it is. So I think, art is really important in that way.
Oh, absolutely. I use it a lot with my clients as I have my intimacy coaching practice. And I talk mostly to people that are getting into non-monogamy for the first time, and they are either starting to swing, or they are looking to add and turn into a throuple. And all of these different types, or they're going to a play party for the first time. How do you find a play party? How do you vet a play party? Or to a dungeon for the first time? What is it going to be like? All of those different things. And one thing that I will recommend to them is, like, if you're unsure and you kind of just want to explore the idea of it in your mind first, grab an erotica, and I'll send them like a laundry list of all of these different types of books that they can check out, or things on Litrotica. I'm a fan of Litrotica for sure. And, hey, just sit and read this out loud to each other and then talk about it. Or better yet, like if you are a writer or you like to write, take notes about how you feel while it's being read to you, and get an understanding of, like, okay, how is my heart racing? Is it making me feel uneasy in any way? And that can help you just to get more in tune with your body, so you are more prepared when you get in those situations, and it isn't something that is so like in your face for the first time. Do I even really want to be here?
For sure.
Erotica just has so many therapeutic opportunities, and people don't think about that. And I think it's also really, really important that for us, just as moving forward as a society, like, being able to see that there are differences in the world, it's a good opportunity for people to even know that, hey, there could be a polyamorous couple living next door. And how do I feel about that? Why do I feel weird about that?
Yeah.
There's just a lot of good opportunity to use it for teaching tools and for opening the mind. And I think too, it's because we have been writing erotica since the inception of time, practically. It's and as we've moved forward and it's become so shunned and sexuality has become shunned, I feel like holistically, like because sexuality is such a huge piece of our human pie, that when a piece of that pie, what happens? We get imbalanced, and that piece is no longer there. All of a sudden, all these other things start getting out of whack, and we feel ashamed, we feel gross, and because we feel ashamed, we need to make that other person feel ashamed.
Yeah.
But if we can start building that back in, show, hey, historically, there have been some kinky people. There have been kings and queens and presidents and all of these people that have had to find outlets. Why are they having to hide it? Why is it something that is so much a part of who we are? Sorry, I'm going on a soapbox rant. My apologies.
No problem at all. No, and I think you're saying so many good things there, and I think it reminds me of how sexuality is, especially now, I think we're seeing how intrinsic it is to policy and power and economy. I mean, if 40 million women are criminalized for having a legal and safe abortion right now, that will have an impact on your sex life, the sex life of your partners. It will really change the dynamic about what you can or cannot do, because it's a different kind of conversation because of resources that are now available to you or not. And that's the same with if you have a erasure of protections as a trans person, as a queer person within public life. It's not that queer people are going to back down or just vanish, which is, I think, maybe the hope of the folks who wrote that legislation. But it does, I think, raise the stakes about how unwelcoming people are for just like that. My identity somehow threatens this entire community of people that I don't know and have never met. And that energy could be galvanized for such other things that would benefit more people, and that we have data that supports these things when it comes to sex, that we have the more information we can provide people, especially young people who are just trying to learn about what's out there, what can we do, that it actually has a benefit in terms of lower teenage pregnancies, which means they're going to stay in school, which means they're going to go into the workforce and get all these great jobs and study and have agency in their life. There's so many things that will happen as a result of just information and trying to cultivate critically thinking people rather than obedient, scared people.
Absolutely.
And I think and also how to navigate that when sex is hard for a lot of people to talk about. There's a lot of unease amongst people, even amongst some people who are publicly seeming very open. Like they have things they just don't want to talk about, or they get uncomfortable talking about, and that's fine. It's like just trying to find a way to share and just say, what are you into? What do you like? What do you don't like? What do you want? And part of that, I think, is having the space to say, I don't want to do that, or I'm not into that. Like, you could be into that, but I'm not into that. There's so many things that we can do as a community and as a couple or as a throuple or as a group. It's just but we have to have those conversations. We have to find some way to talk about these things rather than just guess. I mean, why guess?
It's teaching literacy. I preach about this constantly. My followers and podcast followers and stuff know I have a daughter. She's in middle school. She's going into high school soon. And watching her go through the sex ed program was hard because it was teaching just procreation. It was only teaching biology. It wasn't teaching anything about like, sometimes you have certain feelings in your body, sometimes you want to feel pleasure in certain ways, and there are other options. Or just teaching, the biggest one for me that I see across a number of school districts in teaching sex ed in general, or any sex ed program, even if you're an adult, is really that sex is P and V. It is penis and vagina, and that is it, and there's nothing else. And it's like, well, wait a minute, no, there are a multitude of ways that sex can happen. There is just eroticism in general, and it isn't just about, most of us don't have sex just to have a baby. Like, I would say a vast majority. And you have to teach, okay, what does it feel like to say yes in my body? What does it feel like to say no in my body? What does it feel like to have that discrepancy between the body and the mind and everything else? And why aren't we teaching that? Like, that is vital, not to mention teaching porn literacy, because porn is not what sex is. It's theater. It's really spicy theater. You have to know the difference between, and what even is erotic, what is considered erotic to one person isn't erotic to another one.
Absolutely.
It's just a lot.
And also, in addition to all that, like, I don't know of any, at least in America, of any public school sex education program that includes anything about same sex. It's all presuming this heterosexual norm of two people, and as you say, penis, vagina, don't get pregnant. So it's already framed in this incomplete way. There's nothing about masturbation, which is the safest sex there is. There's nothing about not even like porn literacy, but like, when we say porn, what are we even talking about? Is it Pornhub? Is it erotic literature? Is it some racy thriller movie?
Some people would even consider it to just be that scene on the Titanic, and her hand goes up, like, that's porn for some people.
Totally. I mean, for some, it's like it's a magazine cover. It's an album cover. I mean, there's so much. So it just, and I feel like having that invitation to talk about, like, well, what turns you on? Like, what bring in those ideas? Like, is it that, for me, when I was coming of age, like, MTV was like my Pornhub, I guess, because there were so many great music videos with David Bowie and Freddie Mercury and Prince that were just like, and George Michael, Katie Lang, Madonna, that were really like changing, like, oh, there's another world out here. And it's very sexy. It's very charismatic. It's very strong. And I feel like I can read it that way. And I think others who are not bisexual, they're not getting it. And I'm like, that's fine, because like, this is like my information. So, but I feel like for me, that's like part of how I started to formulate this stuff, because there was no internet. There wasn't, I mean, there were like Playboy and Penthouse magazines, but I felt like I wanted to read like Penthouse Forum. I wanted the letters, because I feel like that was way more stimulating. And then later finding like actual books and meeting actual people. But it's like having a space to do that. And also, I do have to say, I think part of its pleasure is that it was furtive and a little bit of like a spy operation. Like, all right, I'm gonna go to Chris's house, and we're gonna like meet and like look at. I feel like that's part of the thrill that I miss sometimes, in terms of finding something. That's part of what makes something sexy, is that it's a little out of reach, and I have to chase it a little bit. Which I feel like now I've got 5 million options just on my phone that I can look at while I'm ordering a salad at the deli. It's like, it's a different kind of relationship to it. And so I think that's why I'm always encouraging people, like, in-person events, wherever you can, like, try not to just be on your devices, but find the sexy in the world. Like, find that underground that's not streaming, that's not having a live recording. Like, just go there, like, be with people and just hang out. I think it's just so much more like, ooh, what am I going to do? What's going to happen? I think I feel like that kind of butterflies in your stomach is so much more fun and more important, because it gives us more.
Speaking of which, before we wrap up, I know that you had mentioned on your Patreon that you were going to be attending what was it? I wrote it down. The conference, your first the conference that's coming up. Um,
Yes.
I'm very excited for you. I hope I can swing the conference. It's and I know I wrote it down. The Smut Lovers Conference.
Yes.
I'm very excited about that for you. Are you presenting, or are you doing panels, or are you just going like as an attendee?
So this is the Smut Lovers Conference in Orlando, Florida, September 21 to 24th. And it's the first annual edition of this event with writers, educators, guest speakers. And I'm going to be signing books. I'm going to be attending for all 3 days. I'll be, there's a party, there's demos. Whitney Miller, who's another friend of mine from another group, is going to be there as a speaker. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But this will be my first in-person event and book signing, because I've done a lot of stuff virtually. But yeah, I'm excited to just meet new people, see what they're teaching, see what they're writing, hang out, have a few nights with these folks. So if you can get there, if anyone can get there, please come. I will have books to sign. I will be there. Happy to talk with people, see what happens. But I think it'll be a lot of fun. Nikki Rome, who is organizing it, I think is doing an awesome job. And I feel like this is a really good conference. And they're already looking ahead to 2024. So maybe that could be something for you to check out as well as a panelist or as a guest speaker.
No, that would be amazing. I looked at the website. It was very well done. Like, just me, in my background, I was a tech in the educational technology realm. And so a lot of my stuff was building websites and doing conferences and, doing the whole thing. So when I saw that, I was like, oh man, this is really well done just from that perspective of things. And I saw there was like a BDSM workshop, and there's like all these really cool things. So I am very excited for you. I'm excited for everybody. And please speak to your friend. Give them my absolute accolades for a job well done. And I can't wait to see. I'm sure there's going to be pictures and things, hopefully, of after.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's also, what I love about it is that it's writers from erotica, dark romance, taboo, and education all in one place. I think that already is some great ingredients there, because I think sometimes it's either or. So it's nice to have writers and educators saying, yeah, where do we overlap? How are we different? And let's have a conversation. So I think it's going to be great.
Literally a conference for people that are sapiosexual. It is intellectual intoxication to the max.
Exactly. Bring your body and your mind, and the rest will follow.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Christian. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on here. In the future, when you have a book release or you have anything that you're looking to promote, please, I would love to have you back on the show. It's, having another
Thank
writer,
you so much.
It's wonderful, especially one that is a queer one like myself. So I very much appreciate it. If anybody wants to go check him out, I will have all of the links down below. Please go to his Patreon. It's Christian Pan Erotica, Patreon/Christian Pan Erotica. And please go read some amazing erotica. Go give him some kudos and the whole bit. And I will, after all of this, for those that are on my Patreon, I'm going to have an after hours segment with Christian, where we're going to have a little bit of more Q&A that's a little bit spicy. So if you want to hear that, please head on over to my Patreon, sign up. It'll be for those at the $5 level and above. And I hope that everyone has a very sweet weekend. So stay happy, stay healthy, stay kinky, and I will see you all next time. And
thank you so much.